She thought she was flying into love. At 63, Margaret boarded a plane to meet her 27-year-old boyfriend, a man who had promised her forever. But when she landed, nothing looked like the paradise he described. The airport smile vanished, the ride turned wrong, and the night closed in around her. Hours later, she would wake in a place no one could imagine, bruised, violated, and missing something she would never get back. Her children begged her not to go. She didn't listen. And the real question is, how does a promise of love end with blood on the floor? This is the story of a grandmother, careful, cautious, and respected in her community, who believed she had finally found companionship after years of loneliness. For weeks she told her children about him. For months she replayed his words in her mind. "You make me feel alive. I can't wait to show you my world." But before we get to that night of horror, let's go back to the beginning. The moment Margaret clicked accept on a message from a man named Omar Hassan. Margaret's life had always been defined by structure. She worked 2 jobs for years to raise her children, Tyler and Brianna, into adulthood. Bills were always paid, meals always cooked, and the lights never once went out on her watch. Now, at 63, her kids are grown, but the silence inside her home felt heavier than she could carry. Nights stretched long, empty, and lonely. So when the message arrived in her inbox, it didn't feel dangerous. It felt like someone had finally noticed her. His name was Omar Hassan. "I'm 29 years old, a self-made entrepreneur living in Dubai." His first words weren't crude or careless. They were thoughtful, respectful. He wrote about family, about culture, about wanting someone who valued loyalty as much as he did. Would you ignore red flags if you felt wanted for the first time in years? At first, Margaret tried to laugh it off. She told Brianna about the message, joking that a man half her age couldn't possibly be serious. But when she checked her phone the next morning, there he was again, waiting for her reply. One reply turned into two into late-night conversations. Soon, Omar was sending pictures, rooftop views of Dubai's skyline, him leaning casually against luxury cars, videos of him in bustling markets. He told her about his businesses, about the empire he was building, about how lonely success could feel. And then came the gifts. Perfumes wrapped in gold foil, a watch she would never have bought for herself, flowers delivered across oceans. Every gesture chipped away at her doubts, and every doubt that disappeared made space for a new kind of hope. Tyler noticed. "Mom, this doesn't feel right," he said, shaking his head as he saw her unwrap another package. "No man just sends stuff like this, especially not to someone he's never met." Brianna was even harsher. "He's not in love with you, Mom. He's playing you." But Margaret brushed them off. She reminded them that she had never taken risks, never strayed, never asked for more than she had. Maybe, just maybe, she deserved this one chance. Late one night, Omar whispered through the screen, "I don't care about the age difference. When I see you, I see a queen. I want to marry you, Margaret." Her heart trembled at those words. It didn't matter that he was half her age. It didn't matter that she had never left the country before. It didn't even matter that every instinct she once trusted told her to be careful, because sometimes loneliness speaks louder than logic. And that's exactly what Omar counted on. He promised her the world, private tours, candlelit dinners, the kind of romance she thought belonged only to movies. Every message made her children's warnings feel smaller, weaker, easier to dismiss. And then the offer came. 2 tickets, round trip, business class, paid in full. He told her he wanted her to see Dubai the way he saw it, to walk the streets with him by her side, to finally make their connection real. Her children begged her not to go. Tyler slammed his fist against the table. Brianna cried, but Margaret didn't hear their fear. She only heard Omar's voice, soft and steady, "Trust me." And when Omar sent her plane tickets, all expenses paid, Margaret made the choice her children begged her not to make. Margaret packed her bags with shaking hands. Tyler hovered by the door, his jaw tight, his eyes wet with frustration he refused to let fall. Brianna didn't hold back. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched her mother's arm one last time. "Please, Mom," she whispered, "don't go." Margaret kissed her daughter's cheek, her voice trembling as she tried to reassure them both. "It's just a trip. I'll be back before you know it." But the silence that followed was heavier than any goodbye. At the airport, Margaret forced herself not to look back. She walked down the jet bridge, her boarding pass clutched like a promise, her heart pounding with a mix of dread and anticipation. The hum of engines grew louder, the narrow cabin lights casting everything in sterile brightness. When the plane lifted into the sky, she pressed her forehead to the window, watching the city below shrink into pinpricks of light. Would this be the beginning of a new life, or the end of the one she had? Hours later, the desert sun spilled across the airport in Dubai, washing the glass walls in gold. There he was, Omar Hassan, younger than she had dared believe, tall, impeccably dressed, his smile practiced but dazzling. He held a bouquet of roses as though he were welcoming a bride. Margaret's breath caught. For a moment, her doubts vanished. He seemed real. He seemed perfect. Omar led her outside, past rows of taxis and polished town cars. Instead of heading toward the bustling city skyline she'd seen in his photos, he opened the door to a dark SUV. Margaret hesitated, but he touched her hand lightly and whispered, "Trust me. I want to show you something before we check in." The car pulled away, gliding onto a highway lined with neon billboards. For a while, the sights distracted her, glittering towers, palm-shaped islands glowing against the sea. She told herself this was what she had come for. Then, slowly, the lights began to fade. The traffic thinned. The towers disappeared behind them. The smooth road fractured into cracked pavement, warehouses replacing luxury malls. The hum of the city gave way to silence, broken only by the rumble of tires on uneven asphalt. Margaret shifted uneasily in her seat. "Omar, where are we going?" He didn't answer. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioner and the faint click of his fingers against the steering wheel. The sweet scent of her perfume filled the confined space, but it did nothing to mask the growing stench of oil and rust leaking through the vents. Her palms began to sweat. She glanced at her phone, but Omar's sharp look froze her in place. The streets narrowed into alleys, shadows pooled in every corner, broken glass glittering under the headlights like teeth. A dog barked in the distance, the sound quickly swallowed by silence. Something was wrong. Margaret's breath hitched as the car slowed to a crawl in front of a corrugated metal gate. Omar tapped his horn twice. The gate groaned open. And then, the world changed. Figures stepped from the darkness, masked men, their silhouettes illuminated by the SUV's beams. The air outside seemed to thicken, every sound amplified, footsteps on gravel, the squeal of rusted hinges, the crunch of boots circling the car. Margaret's pulse hammered in her ears. She reached for the door handle, but Omar's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. His smile was gone. The rear doors yanked open. Cold hands seized her arms. The night erupted with muffled shouts in a language she didn't understand. The first thing Margaret noticed was the smell. Not perfume, not roses, not the sweetness Omar once promised her, but bleach, sweat, and metal. Her eyes fluttered open against the dim glow of fluorescent lights that flickered above her like dying stars. She wasn't in a hotel. She was strapped to a table. The leather cut into her wrist. Her legs were pinned tight by metal restraints. Across the room, other figures lay stretched on similar tables, men and women, different ages, different races. Some whispered, some cried, some didn't move at all. Margaret's throat tightened. She tried to scream, but the sound barely escaped past the duct tape plastered over her mouth. Was this a dream? A nightmare? No. This was real. Through the haze, she saw them. Masked workers moving from one table to the next, adjusting IV bags, scribbling on clipboards, whispering in languages she couldn't understand. Their movements weren't rushed. They were efficient, practiced. She fought. She kicked, clawed, screamed. But the alley swallowed her cries, and the SUV's doors slammed shut behind her. Rough fabric scraped against her cheek as one of the men forced her to the ground. She tried to scream again, but the sound was cut short. The last thing Margaret remembered was the sound of duct tape ripping across her mouth. Like this had been done many times before. And then it hit her. She wasn't the first. Would you still feel safe meeting someone online if you knew this was where it could lead? One of the victims, a young man, caught her eyes. His lips trembled as he mouthed a single word in English: help. Tears stung her vision. She thought of Tyler. She thought of Brianna. She thought of the last words she'd said to them, that she'd be back before they knew it. Now she wondered if they would ever see her alive again. She heard muffled voices from the corner. A group of men huddled around a laptop screen, the glow reflecting against their masks. Lines of numbers flickered across the display. Bids, transactions, cryptocurrencies flashing like blood money. That's when Margaret understood. Her body wasn't her own anymore. It was inventory. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, panicked breaths. Somewhere beyond the masks and machinery, one pair of eyes lingered on her longer than the rest. Not cold, not detached, watching her in a way that felt different, almost human. Who was it? Why did they stare? The answer would come later. For now, Margaret's world shrank to the sound of rubber gloves snapping, the sting of disinfectant, and the hiss of a machine being prepared nearby. Her wrists burned as she pulled against the straps. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She thought she heard her daughter's voice calling her name, but it was only the echo of her own fear, and then she felt the cold sting of a needle in her arm. The drug spread through Margaret's veins like fire wrapped in ice, numbing her limbs until they no longer obeyed her. Her eyelids grew heavy, but the sharp overhead lights cut through the haze, forcing her awake. She wanted to scream, to fight, to plead for mercy, yet her voice was gone, trapped beneath the duct tape, buried under chemicals. Sounds replaced words, the scrape of metal against metal, the hiss of machines, low voices murmuring as though her body was nothing more than a task to complete. She caught fragments in English, fractured but unmistakable. 17. Healthy. Transaction confirmed. Lot 17, that was her. She blinked hard, her eyes stinging as she tried to focus. Beyond the surgical lamp, a laptop glowed in the corner, faceless buyers hidden behind usernames that flickered across the screen. She could not see their faces, but she could feel them. Strangers somewhere far away, pressing keys, moving money, exchanging pieces of her for profit. The surgeon moved into place. His eyes were unreadable above the mask, but his hands were steady, practiced, precise. He reached for a scalpel. A splash of disinfectant chilled her abdomen, leaving a trail of icy dread across her skin. And then the blade touched her. The pain came sharp and blinding, a white-hot flash that stole her breath. Drugs dulled the edges but refused to erase them entirely, forcing her to exist in the cruel in-between. Not awake enough to resist, not unconscious enough to escape. She felt the tug of gloved hands, the vibration of suction, the acrid sting of cauterized flesh filling the room. Somewhere beyond her own body, voices confirmed the procedure. Tubes shifted, a tray clattered, and then she saw it, lifted high in sterile hands, sealed inside a plastic pouch, carried away from her forever. Her body, betrayed by the very trust that had carried her here, was now a commodity moving through a network she couldn't begin to comprehend. She was no longer a woman, a mother, or a name. She was merchandise. Tears slid into her hairline. She thought of Tyler's angry voice, echoing in her ears as he begged her not to go. She thought of Brianna's hands shaking when she clung to her sleeve at the airport. She thought of all the goodbyes she never imagined could be final. The voices drifted farther as footsteps carried the pouch into the shadows. The glow of the laptop dimmed. The men around her did not look back. For them, this was routine, a job repeated countless times with other victims whose names and faces no longer mattered. But for Margaret, every second stretched like eternity. Every sound became a reminder of what had been stolen. Every breath was a fight to hold on when her body was weaker than it had ever been. And then she noticed it. Among the masks, among the faceless and the indifferent, one figure did not move with the same detachment. One pair of eyes, softer than the rest, lingered on her. watching her longer, holding her gaze as though they saw something more than Lot 17. The drugs dragged Margaret in and out of consciousness. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, each one stretched thin by pain and confusion. She could feel the stitches pulling against her skin, the ache deep inside where something essential had been taken. The others around her moaned, whispered, or lay silent. Machines hummed. Footsteps came and went. Every sound carried menace. Every shadow felt like another hand reaching for her. But then, something shifted. A pair of eyes returned, the same ones that had lingered before. They hovered near her bed, studying her face not with the cold detachment of the others, but with something else. Hesitation. The figure leaned closer, gloved hands brushing lightly against her foreline as though checking it. Beneath the mask, a voice whispered, barely audible, "Don't be afraid. I am not like them." Margaret's eyes widened. Her body trembled against the restraints, but her gaze locked onto those words. The nurse glanced over her shoulder, scanning the room before adjusting Margaret's drip. When she looked back, her eyes softened. "My name is Sophia," she breathed in accented English. "I shouldn't even be speaking to you, but I have to." Margaret's pulse raced. Why was this stranger breaking the silence? Sophia's eyes darted again toward the guards at the far end of the room, then returned. "I did not choose this. They took my passport, my license, everything. They told me if I did not work, they would hurt my family. So I stayed. I obeyed. I kept my head down." Her hand lingered on Margaret's wrist, just long enough for the touch to feel human instead of clinical. "But last night," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling, "I had a dream. God spoke to me. He said, 'The woman on table 3 must live.' And when they brought you in today, I knew it was you." Margaret blinked back tears. Was this real? Was this some twisted trick? Or was this the first crack in the darkness? Do you believe in signs? Or are they just the desperate illusions we cling to when there's no other hope? Sophia leaned closer, her voice fierce now, breaking through the hum of machines. "I cannot save them all, but I can save you, and I will." Margaret's throat constricted with emotion. She wanted to speak, to plead, to beg this woman not to leave her. But the tape and the weakness kept her silent. All she could do was hold on to Sophia's gaze, as if her life depended on it, because it did. The nurse checked her surroundings again, her movements careful, rehearsed. To anyone watching, she was just another staff member adjusting a patient's drip. But her words told a different story. "My cousin Carlos, he works nearby. He knows the streets, the alleys, the guards' routines. If we wait for the right moment, we can slip you out." Margaret's mind spun. Escape. The word felt dangerous to even imagine. Her pulse thundered, fear and hope battling inside her chest. Could this stranger really risk everything for her? And who was Carlos? A rescuer? Or just another shadow in the web? Sophia's hand pressed gently against Margaret's shoulder, steadying her. "I don't know why God chose you," she whispered, "but I know He did. I will not let you die here." For the first time since the nightmare began, Margaret felt something stir inside her that wasn't fear. It was fragile, trembling, but undeniable. Hope. Hope that maybe she would see Tyler again. That maybe Brianna's tears at the airport hadn't been the last memory they'd share. That maybe she would walk free from this place where freedom felt impossible. Sophia straightened, her mask hiding her expression from the others in the room, but her eyes never left Margaret's. She adjusted a monitor, wrote something quickly on a clipboard, and then leaned down once more. Her breath was warm against Margaret's ear. "Tonight," Sophia whispered, "when the guards change, we run." Night arrived like a held breath, thin and tight. The fluorescent hum softened, the revolving door of footsteps thinned, and the warehouse sank into that dangerous quiet where a single wrong sound could shatter everything. Margaret lay still, eyes open, counting the gaps between patrols the way Sophia had taught her, with a tilt of the head and a blink that meant now, not yet. Wait. Sophia came first, gliding into the dim, like she had always belonged to the shadows. No words, only hands, gentle, quick, slipping a tiny pair of surgical scissors under the leather strap at Margaret's wrist, cutting through with a soft, decisive snap. Another strap, then another. Each release burned as blood returned to numb limbs, a rush of pins and needles that felt too loud in her veins. When the last restraint gave, Sophia steadied her with a palm at the shoulder, a warning pressed into skin. Do not fall, do not gasp, do not give us away. From behind a rolling cart, a second figure emerged, compact, wary, eyes scanning corners before they ever dared look at a person. Carlos. He wore the same shapeless scrubs as the others, but nothing about him belonged to this place. He moved like a street that had learned how to survive, not a room that killed to keep its routine. In one hand, a key card. In the other, a folded bundle, dark hoodie, loose pants, soft-soled shoes. He held them out to Margaret without ceremony. Slow, he breathed, the word barely a ripple. No noise. Sophia eased the four from Margaret's arm, pressing gauze into the crook of her elbow until the seeping stopped. The tape came next, peeled away millimeter by millimeter, a tender, torturous mercy. Margaret swallowed the instinct to cough. She swallowed the ache that migrated up from the sutures, the hot line of pain that flared under her ribs with each breath. Pain meant she was still here, still in her body, still able to try. Do you move when your lungs burn and your legs shake, or do you freeze and pray the dark passes you by? Sophia's hands were steady, even while her eyes betrayed the clock ticking in her skull. She guided the hoodie over Margaret's shoulders, masking hospital gown and skin, then wrapped an elastic bandage around her abdomen, an improvised girdle to hold her together when running would demand more than stitches could give. 3 turns, Carlos whispered, pointing. A narrow door behind stacked crates, a short corridor with a camera that stuttered every 30 seconds. The service stair folded like a spine into the wall. When the light blinks, we cross. If it stays steady, we stop. If you hear 2 taps, freeze. Sophia slid a hand under Margaret's arm, the other at the small of her back. Breathe low, she murmured. Don't lift the ribs. The first steps were quiet and vicious. Quiet because the rubber soles kissed concrete without a squeak. Vicious because every muscle in Margaret's body wanted to seize and scream. Her world narrowed to the line of Sophia's shoulder, the warm, grounding pressure of her hand, the whisper of Carlos's fingers counting down intervals in the air. 5, 4, 3, now. They slipped through the crate door into the corridor. A single red dot winked above a camera. It flickered, stuttered, died for a heartbeat, and in that heartbeat they moved, 3 shadows sliding along a wall, holding breath until lungs begged for air. The camera blinked awake behind them. Margaret dared not exhale. The service stair groaned under their weight, iron complaining in a voice older than the building. Carlos grimaced, lifted his palm. Wait. He leaned, listening, his ear to the stairwell's throat. Somewhere below, a radio crackled. A cough answered it. Then silence again, the thin kind stretched taut over danger. He nodded once and they descended. Steps blurred. Landings became islands. The smell changed, bleach receding, oil rising, then damp concrete, then the copper tang of rust. Voices drifted up and down the shaft, sometimes near enough to taste, sometimes far, the language a lattice Margaret could not climb. She watched Sophia's mouth shape counts, watched Carlos move like a fisherman feeling for currents. Her own blood thundered too loud. She was certain it would be heard. He held up 2 fingers, tap, tap, freeze. Their bodies became statues. Footsteps rounded below, a flashlight's cone smeared across the walls like a slow wave. It climbed the angles of the stairwell, brightened, paused just short of them, then slid away. Air returned, thin and hot. At the 3rd landing, Carlos swiped the keycard and shouldered a door into a storage hallway stacked high with wooden pallets and sacks labeled with lies, agricultural supplies, cleaning solvents, machine parts. Sophia guided Margaret between them, turning sideways where the path pinched to a crack. Somewhere behind, a radio chirped, an argument snapped. Two men, one bored, one angry. Voices flared, faded, they moved. The hallway emptied into a loading bay, where the night bled in through a high metal grate. Voices echoed from the far corners. A forklift slept, keys dangling like teeth from its ignition. Carlos's hand flicked a signal, and Sophia steered Margaret behind a row of plastic-wrapped crates. They crouched. The plastic crackled like ice. Breath, Sophia mouthed. Slow. Light flared at the bay's far door. Two guards stepped in, laughing about something crude and small. Their flashlights bounced across the floor, climbed the crates, jittered along the ceiling. One beam hovered a second too long. It slid, returned, steadied. Carlos's hand tightened into a fist. The beam lowered. Boots moved away. A door slammed. The bay swallowed the sound. Now, Carlos whispered. He took the forklift keys, turned the ignition without starting the engine, and rolled it in neutral, inch by inch, to block the sight line from the guard booth to the grate. A makeshift wall, a narrow wedge of night carved between machine and crates just wide enough for a body to pass. He pried at the grate's bolts with a flat tool borrowed from the forklift's maintenance kit. Each twist squealed, a ratcheted wail that made Margaret's teeth hurt. 3 more, he breathed. 2, 1. The grate came loose. Air hit her face. Not hospital air, not recycled breath, but night, diesel and dust and distant sea, the smell of outside that makes your chest ache for the size of it. Carlos slid the grate up, and Sophia helped Margaret lower herself to the ground beyond, every movement pulling fire through her sutures. Her vision swam. She gritted her teeth until she tasted iron. There would be time to hurt later, not now. They crawled into an alley that felt like the inside of a throat, narrow, wet, choked with trash. A single strip of sky ran far above, a torn ribbon between roofs. Somewhere to the left, a generator rattled. Somewhere to the right, a dog barked once and then thought better of it. Sophia's hand found Margaret's again. Almost, she breathed. Almost. Stagger. Pause. Listen. Stagger. Pause. Listen. Their progress became a pattern matched to darkness, darting between dumpsters, pressing into the ribbed shadows of corrugated walls, flattening themselves behind a discarded door where paint peeled like old sunburn. Margaret moved the way a body moves when pain is a tide. She timed her steps to the receding wave, stole inches, then stood still until the surge passed. Do you run on torn stitches, or do you kneel and let the night eat you? The alley spat them into a tighter artery where pipes ran overhead and steam coughed from a vent. Carlos stopped, hand up. Voices again, closer, impatient. The sharp insect buzz of a radio. One man swore, the word hard and familiar in every language. Another answered. Boots scraped, then retreated the other way. Carlos dropped his hand and they slid on. At the end of the artery, a low tunnel yawned under a set of concrete steps. Storm drain, Carlos mouthed. Short. He knelt and dropped first, vanished into cool darkness. Sophia went next, turning to help ease Margaret down. The tunnel's mouth hit her with damp air that smelled like old rain and iron. Overhead, the world squeezed tight until their breaths bounced back at them. Water slapped softly against stone. Inside the tunnel, sound compressed into a private thunder. Their own steps. The shallow slap of a trickle. The whisper rush of fear. Flashlight beams, thin, disciplined, stayed hooded beneath Carlos's palm. A faint lick of light to keep them from cracking their skulls. Twice they stopped as footsteps thudded above, close enough to feel in the tunnel's skin. Twice Margaret held her breath, until her vision pricked with stars. The tunnel spat them into a courtyard behind a row of shuttered workshops. A rusted gate held with a chain cut across the only exit. Carlos slid a tool through the links, twisted. Metal gave with a soft clink and a sigh. He wound the chain carefully, laying it so it would look undisturbed to an uncurious eye. They slipped through one at a time and pulled the gate quietly back into place. Across the courtyard, a light snapped on in a second-story window. A face pressed to glass. The silence fractured. Go, Carlos hissed, and they did. They hugged the wall, then sprinted, Margaret's sprint a stitched-together shuffle powered by terror and will, across an open lane toward a stack of shipping containers. Voices rose behind them, alarmed now. A whistle ripped the air like a seam. A door banged open. Somewhere a radio erupted, snapping to life as if it had been waiting. The first shout was a question. The second was an order. The third was a name she recognized from the worst hours of her life. Flashlights knifed the dark white cones, sweeping in arcs that erased shadows and then redrew them. Carlos jerked left between containers, and the three of them squeezed into a slot so narrow the metal chilled their shoulders. Light washed past, paused, reversed, and then a beam slid along the crack and found the glint of Sophia's eye. "Run," she whispered. They exploded from the slot and cut right. Boots hammered behind them, heavy, eager. The ground pitched from concrete to packed sand to a scatter of glass that sliced through the thin soles of cheap shoes. Margaret bit down on the scream rising in her throat, tasted blood, and kept moving. Her world was now a rhythm. Step, pull, burn, step, pull, burn. A siren wailed, distant but swelling. Not the city's honest siren, but the facility's, an inside voice turned outward. Doors opened, shouts multiplied. A gun barked once into the sky, a threat more than a shot, but the sound shoved adrenaline into every limb. Left, Carlos gasped, and they careened into a side passage that stank of mildew and old rope. Ahead, a chain-link fence, topped with coils of wire. Beyond it, the long, dark run of a service road that led away from everything Margaret knew to be death. Carlos threw himself at the fence, climbed like a man who had learned to ignore pain. Sophia pushed Margaret's foot into a rung, then another, hands bracing her hips, every lift a blade inside her abdomen. The fence became a wall of needles. She rasped air that tasted like pennies and said nothing because there was no space for sound. At the top, Carlos pressed the wire down with a folded tarp, forearm shaking. Sophia hauled, and Margaret swung a leg over, felt the tarp slip, felt teeth catch at her hoodie, heard fabric tear. She dropped hard on the other side, knees screaming, stomach twisting. The world wobbled, steadied. Sophia followed, catching her palm on a barb that opened a bright, wet flower. She did not look at it. Carlos landed last, pulling the tarp free and letting the wire spring back into a snarling crown. They ran, or rather Carlos ran, and Sophia and Margaret made the shape of running, bodies pitched forward, gravity doing the rest. The service road stretched ahead, empty and endless. Behind them, flashlights spilled through the fence's grid, chopping the dark into cages. Voices shattered and reformed, closer than they should have been. A truck engine coughed to life to their left, lights swinging as it pivoted. Tires squealed. Carlos yanked them into the ditch where thorny scrub clawed at their clothes and hid them just enough to rob the headlights of their power. The truck roared past, braked, reversed, surged forward again. A spotlight drilled the ditch and slid away, hunting elsewhere. Carlos didn't wait to be lucky twice. "Up," he breathed. "Up." They crossed a narrow strip of broken asphalt and flattened against a wall where faded graffiti sagged in the heat. The wall ended at a blind corner. Carlos peered twice, clear. They went and met another beam head-on. A guard phoned to his ear, flashlight in his free hand. For a second, everyone froze, the world holding itself perfectly still. 3 fugitives, 1 man with a decision. Carlos moved first, a hard shove to the guard's shoulder that spun him into the wall. The phone skittered. The flashlight fell and rolled, throwing wild galaxies of light. Sophia grabbed Margaret and pulled, and they slipped past as the guard recovered enough to shout, a sound that tore open every nearby door. The road ahead sloped into a series of alleys that braided and unbraided, confusing even at noon, treacherous at night. Carlos chose without hesitation, right, left, until Margaret no longer knew one direction from another. Her breath went ragged. The bandage at her abdomen felt wet and warm. Every step carved a deeper groove in her bones. "Almost," Sophia said, and Margaret believed her because the alternative would have finished her then and there. Then the alleys emptied into a wider lane and the night opened again. Too open. Their footsteps rang. The echoes betrayed them. Light bloomed behind and to the side, a double flare that meant two teams and no good lanes left to disappear into. Carlos pointed at a collapsed section of fencing ahead, ripped open around a concrete post. "Through," he said, and they went. The torn metal snagged the hem of Margaret's pants and held like a stubborn hand. Sophia tore the fabric free, the sound loud enough to feel wrong in her teeth. A shout, closer, another, angry. A radio crackled. The siren wailed again, nearer now, or maybe that was just her blood in her ears. Margaret's legs faltered. The world turned soft at the edges, as though someone had smeared a thumb across every line she needed to see. She tasted copper and dust. She tried to count steps and lost track at 3. Her body drew a line and she stumbled over it. "Not yet," Sophia breathed, catching her under the arms, taking more of her weight than her own frame should have allowed. Carlos ran backward for 3 strides, scanning the angles, then spun and led them down a final, narrow cut between 2 cinder block walls. Flashlights blossomed at the mouth of the cut, spilled down the passage, found the shine of Sophia's cheek, the curve of Margaret's shoulder, the dark of Carlos's back. The light grew until it erased shadow. Voices converged. They kept moving. There was nothing else to do. Margaret's foot clipped a broken brick. She pitched forward and the world lurched. Pain detonated. Pure, bright, ridiculous pain that felt almost like a laugh turned inside out. She clamped a hand to her abdomen. Warmth spread across her palm. The bandage had soaked through. Sophia saw the red and went whiter than her mask. Just a little more, she lied, because hope is an engine even when it runs on fumes. The passage opened onto a final strip of road that tilted toward darkness like a promise. Carlos checked the angle of the flashlights behind them and chose speed over stealth. "Go!" 3 steps, 5, 8. Margaret's knees buckled. The road tipped. The lights stretched into spears. A voice shouted her name, not her number, and that almost broke her more than anything. Her vision blurred, and she thought she saw her children's faces before everything went black. Before Omar ever set foot on American soil again, the hunt had already begun. His downfall wasn't triggered by witness statements or photographs. It was numbers, strings of code, silent trails of cryptocurrency transactions moving through the dark web, the kind traffickers thought could never be traced. But the FBI's cyber unit had learned to read those shadows like street signs. Each transfer told a story, and Omar's arrogance wrote every line. While Margaret lay recovering overseas, agents in Washington pulled his digital life apart piece by piece. Payments disguised as shipping invoices, wallets hidden behind layers of encryption, conversations buried in chat rooms that required 3 passwords just to enter. All of it led back to the same man who believed he could sell lives like merchandise and walk away untouchable. And here's the truth. Before Omar ever boarded his return flight, agents already knew his every secret. We've all seen predators think they're invincible, haven't we? They believe the system can't catch them, that their masks are too convincing, that their trails are too well hidden. But arrogance always leaves a crack, and Omar's was wide enough to swallow him whole. The plan was simple. He'd grown confident, reckless even, assuming that his network in Dubai insulated him from exposure. But when he booked a flight to New York, the Bureau saw opportunity. Interpol passed the data. The U.S. Attorney signed off, and task force agents began to assemble at JFK International like chess pieces placed with care. For Omar, it was just another trip, another city, another chance to flaunt his wealth and connections. He wore a tailored suit, gold watch flashing in the terminal lights. To everyone else in the arrivals hall, he looked like any other international traveler returning home. He smiled at a flight attendant as he stepped off the jet bridge, the kind of smile that had once lured Margaret into believing his promises. But downstairs, beyond the glass, agents were already in position. Special Agent Rowe, leading the operation, spoke in a calm murmur through his earpiece. "Confirm visual, maintain distance, wait for customs." The team spread through the terminal, 2 near the baggage carousel, another near the information desk. one seated casually with a newspaper in hand. To anyone watching, they were invisible. To each other, they were a noose tightening one link at a time. Omar strode down the concourse, phone pressed to his ear, voice low. He talked about meetings, transfers, deals to finalize. He had no idea that the very phone in his hand was being mirrored in real time by federal systems, every word transcribed as he spoke it. Community check. Haven't we all witnessed how the boldest villains never imagine the trap until it's too late? The tension built as he entered the customs line. Dozens of travelers fidgeted with passports, parents soothed crying children, attendants waved people forward. To Omar, it was routine. To the agents, it was the final stretch. "Copy, he's second from the front," came the whisper in Rose's ear. The officer at the booth scanned passports with mechanical repetition. Beep, stamp, slide back. Then Omar stepped forward, handing over his documents with a smile that had talked its way past 1,000 doors. The officer didn't look up. He scanned the passport. The screen pinged. Not the green of approval, not the red of denial, a special alert, silent, immediate. The officer's eyes flicked once to the corner of his screen, then back to Omar, face unreadable. Behind him, the line shuffled. Impatient travelers shifted bags. A baby cried. To Omar, it was just another delay. To the agents, it was the signal. Rose's voice was calm, measured. "Stand by. 3 seconds." Omar tapped his phone against the counter, pretending at irritation, his confidence still intact. And that's where the tension pivots. If you're watching this now and you haven't subscribed, ask yourself, why would you want to miss what happens when the predator finally realizes he's the prey? Because the moment came. The officer slid the passport back across the counter with a polite nod. Omar picked it up, adjusting the cuff of his suit, stepping casually toward the green double doors that led to baggage claim. He never saw the agents weaving into position behind him, their movements swallowed by the crowd's shuffle. 1 step, 2, 3. The double doors opened. He crossed the threshold. The air changed, freedom almost within reach. And then it ended. As Omar walked through customs, a hand gripped his shoulder. The grip on Omar's shoulder was followed by a second hand locking around his wrist. His phone slipped from his fingers, clattering to the polished airport floor. In an instant, he was surrounded. Badges flashed, voices firm, passengers scattering with startled gasps. For once, Omar had no clever smile, no charm, no escape. By the time he was let out of JFK in cuffs, the evidence was already airtight. Every encrypted wallet, every shipment, every stolen organ traced and tied. Prosecutors moved quickly. The trial was swift, the verdict inevitable. The jury didn't even glance at him as they delivered it, guilty on all counts. Omar Hassan, the man who lured women with promises of love and sold their bodies piece by piece, was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Margaret watched the coverage from home, her body healing, her scar still raw but her spirit unbroken. And when the gavel came down, she exhaled a breath she'd been holding since the night she boarded that plane. Weeks later, her children met her at the airport. Tyler held her first, burying his face against her shoulder. His anger melted into relief. Brianna clung to her hand as though letting go might undo everything. Margaret didn't speak at first. She didn't need to. The warmth of their embrace, the simple miracle of being together again, said more than words ever could. Neighbors came. Friends visited. Some cried at the sight of her, frailer but alive. Yet every smile carried shadows, every laugh stitched over silence. She knew she would never be the same. But she was still here, and that mattered. This could happen to anyone. Romance scams aren't just about stolen money. Sometimes they steal what no one can ever replace: your body, your freedom, your life. Margaret's story is proof that predators don't always lurk in alleys or shadows. Sometimes they smile through a glowing screen, promising love when what they really want is power. Would you have seen the red flags? Or would you, like Margaret, have believed? That's the question no one wants to answer honestly. And that's why stories like this must be told, because somewhere, right now, another message has been sent. Another promise is being made. Another life is on the line. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe to our channel, because the next story might just save a life.